Welcome back to another episode of the Additive Snack podcast. I'm your host, Fabian Ahlerfeld. And today, for the first time actually, we'll dive into the fascinating interface between consumer 3D printing and industrial 3D printing. So we'll look at both sides of additive manufacturing with a very special guest. There is probably no better person to have on the show to talk about exactly that topic. And joining us today is Joel Telling, but better known as the 3D printing nerd. Joel, you transitioned from software development to becoming a leading voice in the 3D printing industry, more than 600,000 followers. And I think one of the, if not the only full-time influencer content creators in the industry, which I think is really impressive. And as you are today still one of the key voices of the industry, and you're helping people to get into additive manufacturing on a daily basis, that alone deserves a big thank you. But I also want to thank you, of course, for being on the show with us today. Joel, welcome to Additive Snack.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So actually, I want to jump right into the beautiful word of 3D printing and of additive. There's a lot of bold statements out there today, and I kind of want to have a discussion with you on those because I think you and I have a lot of similarities, but also different viewpoints on the industry. You look at it very often from a consumer perspective, and I look at it very often from a industrial perspective. And I want to have that discussion with you because I think it's important.
Great.
Yeah, it's important to do that because we can't call everything 3D printing. We have to talk about the differences as well. So in your point of view, where is the additive industry today? Are we facing a doom? Is it just evolving? What's your take on the whole thing?
It seems like every year there's always someone or some publication or someone floats the idea, is 3D printing dead? Is additive manufacturing dead? There's always someone that seems to float that annually. Sometimes it ties into perhaps a show so that discussions can be had, or sometimes it's towards the end of the year. I think that where we're at in additive from the consumer side and the industrial side, just in general, I think additive is on the right course. I think that what we're seeing both on the industrial side and on the consumer side is some really cool and emerging tech that's bringing the costs down, bringing the efficiency up and the functionality up. And we're seeing a lot of people, at least I'm seeing people that watched my show when they were in school and are now finding themselves working within the industry.
Wow.
On the industrial and the professional side. I don't see it as a doom and gloom. I consider myself to be a bit of an optimist, and I'm always trying to inspire, but realistic look at the industry, at least from my point of view, says that we're getting good people in and we have good technology. And it's just, I don't know. I think we're in a good spot. What's your take on it?
I could not agree more. I think, I've not been in the industry as long as you have. I think only 8 years. It's a little bit. And every year there is somebody who thinks that the additive industry is about to end. And we've always moved forward even faster. And I think we do have to look at additive manufacturing a bit more granular. I think we have to look at different industries, and we have to have a discussion on how far is the adoption of additive in certain industries, because some industries are way further than others for various reasons, whether if it's material availability, whether if it's data that's available on certain material performances, or whether if it's just cost. So the space industry is at a very different point than the automotive industry.
Yes, absolutely. But some of the same factors apply. Like cost is always an issue within additive. There's 3 switches that you can pull, and only 2 of them, it's like cheaper, faster, better, something like that. You can have something cheaper and faster, but it's not better. You can have something better and cheaper, but it's not faster. And it's always been subjected to that. I was at the EOS booth at Formnext, and I forget who I was talking to, wonderful human, but it talked about bringing additive into an older industry. And we were talking about these little gas engine bodies that were being made. I think it was in 3D printed aluminum. There was a giant build plate of parts there that were all printed. And the idea was to bring down the cost of additive so that it matched the manufacturing method that they would have done before. And part of the reason why it was being shown off at Formnext is because they had got the processes down and the materials down where they could actually compete at a cost basis, a cost per part basis with traditional manufacturing methods. And so I think that's key for getting a lot more qualified parts into the world from additive. Surely space travel, there's a lot more qualifications that need to happen for parts that go on a spaceship than there are in a little two-stroke engine on your lawnmower or whatever. But we're getting there. I think with airline, I had an interesting conversation with someone at Formnext, talked about the airline industry and how 3D printing you can create and manufacture a lot of parts that are actually qualified for the airlines. However, public perception is what's holding them back because the general public, I'm going to say, doesn't necessarily have the knowledge of what additive can bring and how it's safe, if not safer, and how it reduces part counts and part cost. And so he talked about how adoption of additive within airlines was a public perception problem and not a technical problem, which I thought was fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take. And public perception obviously also then translates into how the FAA thinks about additive manufacturing and about qualifying additive manufacturing parts. And there's certainly still a lot of room to grow. But I agree. And that's the interesting thing about additive manufacturing. The media is typically within the additive manufacturing groups. And we have a hard time breaking out of them and communicating to the broader world that most of, if not every rocket we're sending into space today has highly critical components on it that are additively manufactured.
Right. But there's no humans on any of those rockets.
There are humans on some of these rockets and devices that definitely leverage additive manufacturing for critical components.
Oh, okay. So in the perception from the public, a lot of the 3D printed parts within rockets, like the engines, where the engines have the 3D printed engines and rockets and then rocket motors and the bodies and whatnot. A lot of times what the public is shown is that they're testing these. Like, who was it? Was it Veritasium? Derek Mueller? He visited the rocket company down in Southern California and they got to see the printing of the rocket bodies. And so I thought that was interesting. And obviously the next generation of rocketry is going to have more additive manufacturing than before. And obviously at some point it's going to bring humans back to the moon and to Mars and to Venus and whatever.
Yeah.
But I still think that is not something that is touted by the industry when humans are involved.
Yeah, for sure. There might be certain public relations folks that do that on purpose for various reasons at this rocket.
Could be.
And I think space is one of the extremes. I think the energy industry is another great example of a point of no return where gas turbines by, for example, Siemens, leverage parts that are printed that couldn't be manufactured in any other technology.
That's right.
And the point I'm really trying to make is we can't say additive hasn't crossed the chasm. I think in certain industries, you could probably say that companies have reached a point of no return. And for them, additive is definitely across the chasm and has been widely adopted by their technology. I'm curious how you view that from a consumer perspective. What's the adoption of 3D printing for consumers or private end users? How has that evolved over the past years?
So the consumer adoption of additive is based on the RepRap project, and it has evolved into machines that they melt polymers onto a hot build plate over time. A glue gun with a robotic arm is essentially the consumer side of additive. I know that we've really taken the hockey stick of growth within the resin side of additive on the consumers, but still the adoption for the little robot that melts the plastic into a shape, that has really taken off, and it's really seen some great advances in the last few years. There's a company right now, Bamboo Lab, who has created some of the lowest cost and highest performing machines that exist in the consumer side. Also, that one right there, that's the Prusa XL from Prusa 3D out of the Czech Republic. You can use, it's got 5 different heads on it, 5 different extruders and it switches between them to make a part or a model out of 5 different materials or 5 different parts. So, a consumer, I can
Wow.
utilize a machine like this to make a rigid part that has flexible hinges. Or with those bamboo machines, I can make a custom part that has up to 16 different colors of material in it. So on the consumer side, we're seeing this amazing growth, this absolutely amazing growth. And I think while we're growing on the consumer side, I think that we're still deficient in being able to translate the knowledge of what additive is on the consumer side into the professional and the industrial. Like I've been to Görlitz, Germany with Siemens, and I've seen the gas turbines, and I've seen parts they've made. And I've got to tour the factory floor and see these parts and how they make them and how they machine them and how they install them. And we talked about what they can power. It was an amazing thing. But you can't take everyone in the world who is interested in consumer side and take them on a tour through Siemens. So how do you bridge that gap? How do you explain to people that, oh, in the energy sector, yes, additive has bridged the chasm and we are on the other side. We are now making parts with additive for this industry that could not be made any other way. And that's honestly the story that I'm trying to tell in what I do, because I showcase a lot of the consumer side of things, but also like I interviewed, I forget his name, wonderful human at the booth at EOS at Formnext. And we talked about those aluminum motors, and I did booth interviews at other places. And I put those videos on my channel. And then people who are not in the professional, not in the industrial side, can see how additive is being used in other industries. And it's going. It would be great if more people saw what is possible. And I can only bring them so much, but I think we're getting there. I think that I love that you said cross the chasm, because there's so many stories to tell on the industrial side of companies utilizing additive for their processes where the parts that are being made cannot be made any other way. And those are the stories to tell. And I think this coming up year, my producer and I have some really good ideas on how to further tell those stories and how to get the industrial side more integrated with the consumer side in a way.
Yeah.
There's that chasm of additive in industries, but now there's that knowledge chasm between professional and industrial and the consumer side. And so we have some fun ideas. I don't know. Could be a
Yeah.
good year.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more about those, and obviously also support those, right? Because from my perspective, you play such a crucial role in the education of also future industrial engineers that hopefully develop applications that leverage additive manufacturing.
I was talking to TCT magazine at Formnext, and I think I don't remember the question, but I remember I talked about additive having to overcome a generational problem. Like I think that the old guard has to age out, because what you and I and others that are around our age and working in the industry, we were aware of traditional manufacturing, and then 3D printing, additive manufacturing came along. And then we were like, oh, now we need to design for additive. And I think at some point there's a generational switch, and it's no longer additive as well as traditional, and it's not designed for additive. I think at some point we are just the design inherently is for additive, because additive manufacturing is just a standard manufacturing technology. It's no longer an addition to. And I think once we get to that point, I think that there's a generational switch and a massive perception switch. And that's when we start to see a little bit of a hockey stick in our graphs.
Yeah. I'm always a little bit skeptical of a hockey stick, just because it's we're
All doom
talking
and gloom, huh?
No, because it is a capital equipment industry, and it's very different to scale exponentially if you have a SaaS business model, right? Where
Sure.
I can scale very quickly. Additive, what most people and companies underestimate, I think, is repeatability, is building equipment that prints on location A the exact same part and specifications on then on location B. It's very difficult to scale that up, but I do agree that the adoption can get into a hockey stick once we switch over a whole generation that grows up in a digital world where additive manufacturing might just be a very common manufacturing technology that they think about from the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, for the past couple of years, there have been kids who have been born who will never know that there were physical buttons on a telephone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because all they will know is that swipe to unlock, or you look at your phone and it unlocks, or you draw a pattern and it unlocks. And they'll be like, oh, like you used to have to push buttons on it. Like we get to that point of, like you've mentioned, crossing the chasm or the point of no return. But we have moved technology to a point where now kids born today, there's a certain line of information they don't have because it's now considered old. Like,
Mhm.
need to think about. And so that hockey stick, I know in a SaaS business model, having to scale on the business side of a corporation, that's a really difficult thing to do. But when public adoption does that, and more of the general public knowing about the benefits of what additive provides, now all of the sudden you on the business, the SaaS model doesn't get a hockey stick, but it starts to hit a growth. You get a very defined good growth because many more public are not interested in what's happening.
Yeah. And you do have a background in software development.
Right.
And I think that shift is actually very interesting. But before I ask you a question that I think is very fun to talk about, how did Joel Telling, the software engineer, become the 3D printing nerd? What was that journey?
I've been a giant nerd all my life, and I like tech. I like nerdy things. From back in the day, I've built my computers from a young age, and I utilized software to make them do what I wanted them to do. And part of being a nerd that likes technology means I also like camera equipment. And so I acquired that because I wanted to shoot videos with my friends.
Mhm.
And over the years, I had my own startup company. I worked at HP and Microsoft and Nuance Communications, who is the original developer of the language model for Siri. Um,
Interesting.
I worked, I worked at, let's see. So my last job then was at Adobe. I worked there for 3.5 years on the After Effects team and as a quality engineer in engineering. So I get to develop the scripts that automate the testing of the GPU versus varying effects to find out whether or not they run fast enough on the GPU. Super nerdy, right? Then 3D printing came along. I was always interested in it, but it appealed to that nerdy side. Here I am controlling a robot with a glue gun at the end of it, and it'll spit it out and then cool it into a shape that I can hold in my hand. I can make things on the computer appear in real life. And it's just that, of course, that technology was fascinating to me. And while I was a software developer, it turns out at Adobe, I had my first 3D printer and I played with it and stuff. I was really excited to show people what I learned. I figured people could learn along with me. And so I had a bunch of video equipment and microphones, and I knew how to hit record. And I knew how to edit video. And I have a very highly technical background in quality engineering, so quality control. So being able to reproduce steps of something and being able to properly communicate each part of the way was just a part of my job function. And I made videos and I talked about what I would do. And I would lead people through how to design something or how I tested something, or I just brought joy. I was like, I love this.
Mhm.
I love this. You might as well. So here it is. Take a look at it. So that's kind of all started out. So I utilized a software background, just the ability to poke and prod things in a specific way to get certain outcomes. So with any sort of technological device, whatever you're testing, it just happens to be now I'm testing 3D printers. So being able to do that, but also being able to put together a proper audio visual presentation in the form of a YouTube video. Put those two together and you get me, the 3D printing nerd.
There he is. All right, now to my actual question, which is when we develop applications in additive manufacturing, I think it's very interesting to lend ourselves some tools out of the software development industry to shorten the development cycles. I think in software, it's super common. I write some code, then I run the code, and I see if it works or not. If it doesn't work, I look for the root cause. If it
Sure.
works, I move on, right? And I add to it. Now, in additive, I can do the same thing. I can design a part, I can print it overnight, assess it the next day. Did it build? Did it not build? If it built, do we see any challenges with it? And tweak my design or my process as we go.
Mhm.
Is that something where innately you approached additive manufacturing in a very similar process as you did in software development?
As far as developing applications or processes within the additive manufacturing industry, it's 100% the same. So you're following a process where you're in code, you're coding up something and then you run it and you get a result. And then does the result do what you need it to do? Yes or no? It's a flow chart. But in additive, you're coding up something, just happens to be, could be a three-dimensional model, could be a machine movement sequence, it could be anything within that. And then running it, it's now, whereas with software, typically you're having to test a purely digital process. And it could be on a device, but it's a digital process on the device. But now what you're doing is you're testing a digital process that may influence a physical thing. And so we have that in software, just with embedded systems and control systems and all that, but that lends itself directly to what additive manufacturing is. I wouldn't be surprised if the next generation of application engineers within additive manufacturing have a software engineering background. Like, it makes
Yeah.
sense. It
Yeah.
absolutely makes sense. You could have an additive manufacturing course within a software engineering college class easily, absolutely easily, because the same processes apply.
Yeah. And as SaaS companies and tech companies become more efficient because of artificial intelligence and just the increased efficiency of software engineers, we may even welcome all of you software engineers
For
to the
now,
additive manufacturing industry. Yeah, because we definitely need talent, and we need folks who can think a bit differently than how we've thought in additive manufacturing for a long time.
well, it could be, but the more I talk about it, the more it makes sense that software engineering works within the additive manufacturing areas. And we
Yeah,
should explore that.
we should. Let's make it a bit more tangible. I think a lot of companies that are exploring additive manufacturing for various production applications, they oftentimes struggle with the first steps, right? They struggle with what is the right technology? What is a true business case for additive manufacturing? That alone is quite complex, and it can get quite complex, especially when you talk about spare parts, high
Hmm.
performance applications, and so on and so forth. And when you and I talked in the past, I think it's advisable to encourage folks to also look into a consumer 3D printer to get your feet wet in that technology, to truly understand the process. There's obviously a big difference between a laser powder bed fusion or a multi-jet fusion process versus a FDM printer, but you still are
Yes.
printing on a layer by layer basis. You
Hmm.
still, for some technologies, need support structures. What is your advice to people who think, yeah, I'm now tasked to implement additive manufacturing into my organization, and I will run all these business cases, but I also very quickly want to understand the technology better on a deeper level. How should they approach it with an easily accessible technology like consumer 3D printing?
That's super broad, right? That how can someone implement additive into a company with, I think that we should break that down a little bit
Yeah,
into its
let's do it.
component parts. So I think consumer-based 3D printing machines, they cost, in the grand scheme of industrial development, they cost nothing, like nothing. You could, a few $100s gets you a machine that can perform really well and the materials that machine can use.
Mhm.
No experience with the additive manufacturing process. Obviously, a few $100s investment for you to tinker with something works. If all you know If all you know is the professional side, like I've talked to a number of engineers and salespeople at FormNext and Rapid who are like, hey, what do you use at home? Oh, I don't 3D print at home. No, I go use the powder bed at work if I want to print anything. I'm like, what's going on here? I think that it behooves everybody within the additive manufacturing industry to have a basic knowledge of what is happening on the consumer side, because most of the time, those people on the consumer side are going to grow up and possibly find positions within the professional and the industrial side. So any way that you can understand what they're going through and possibly augment their experience to make it more beneficial or to make the knowledge transfer easier is going to be beneficial for the future. I remember at Rapid 2018, I went to the GE booth and I was going to talk. There was a supercar there and it had these 3D printed rims on it and they looked fantastic. And I wanted to talk to someone there about it on camera. And so I did. They found someone for me and he was a typical analyst he wasn't excited to talk to me. Here I am in my hoodie and my camera guy, and we're just going around talking to people, really excited to share the passion for additive. And he wasn't warm at first, but as we started talking, we warmed up a little bit. We had some laughs. It turned out to be a fantastic conversation. That was part of a YouTube video that has, I think, 1.5 million views on it. It was really popular with everybody. And I remember that was the first day of the show. And by the time the last day of the show came up, I was walking around and this guy from GE came running up to me. And he said, I've been looking for you all over. Our talk was so amazing and I felt inspired. So I went to the Creality booth and they sold me one of the machines from their booth and I'm going to take it home and I'm going to learn it. And that blew my mind because that's exactly what I would have hoped would have happened. Like he found that the conversation with me was so inspiring that he went to a booth at this trade show and convinced this company to sell him one of the machines, one of the very low cost machines from their booth, so he could take it home and play with it.
And now 6 years
Cool is
later,
that?
yeah, that's awesome. And now 6 years later,
Yeah. So now we're friends on LinkedIn. Sometimes
yeah,
like the shows, like it's really exciting. And he's not the only person that's done this because like I said, I've gone to these shows and I'll have people in suits and ties or dressed to the nines with a really nice skirt and a jacket come up and say, hey, Joel, I used to watch your show when I was in school and now look at me, look where I'm working. Come show me. So not only did the stuff that I make inspire them to a point where they could take their knowledge to the next level and work on the industrial professional side, but in seeing me, it brought joy to their face because they were excited to tell me about it. How cool is that?
really cool. And like I said in the beginning, that's why I think it's so important what you do, because you inspire people to really get into the technology from an all-encompassing perspective. And you do the same thing to me, right? I have 2 walls over. There is the largest industrial equipment in additive. I could print if I wanted to combustion chamber now, but I don't have a consumer 3D printer at home, and I never have. So if I were to get one myself, which one would you recommend to someone like me?
Knowing you have some technical ability. You're a friend of technology.
Yeah.
A lot of times what people do is they try to figure out, here's how much space I have to dedicate to the machine. Here are the things that I want to try and make. And so what machines do that within my budget is what we do. So right now you have a number of machines that are just a few $100s, but fit the bill for having a lot of future technology, such as automatic bed leveling, be able to probe the bed so that you don't have to turn screws on the bed to level it, and the ability to print faster using a specific piece of software, and the ability to print hotter. And so like nylons and polycarbonates are now possible on the consumer side, much easier. One of the companies I talked about before, Bamboo Lab, on the consumer side, they have come out with a few recent machines this year or last year now, and happy 2024, last year that really took the market. And a lot of people have found success with these because they are super low cost,
Mm.
polish them incredibly well. Like the first run and the user experience is paramount in these things. And they made it really easy to be able to print with multicolored filament. And we're talking like $300 to $400.
Wow. Okay. And which materials do you recommend for folks just getting into tech? I know,
So
and
just getting into it, the easiest material to print is called PLA, polylactic acid, and it melts between 190 and 210 C really easily. The bed itself, a PEI bed or a glass bed or a bed with additives or glue stick or whatever will hold it. You want the bed to 60 C to be able to hold it. It's not bad. It's one of the easiest and most forgiving filaments to be able to print. It's not hygroscopic, so you're not going to have to worry about humidity too much. Like you don't, people that live in Florida do have to sometimes dry all of their filaments just because it's really humid down there.
Mhm.
Seattle, relative humidity is relatively low. I could leave filaments out for years and not have an issue. PLA filament, that's the easiest one for people to get started with.
okay, okay.
Yep.
Which Bamboo Lab printer is? I'm guessing they have different models. Which
They
one do you
do.
recommend?
On the consumer side, you have their A1 series. So the A1 and the A1 Mini, they have a bed that moves on the Y axis, and then you have a head that moves on X axis, and then they bring the head up on Z or Z as it's building something. The A1 Mini, those are the ones they released last year that really took the world by storm, and they've sold lots of them. And then before those, they had their X1 series. Now, these machines utilize the different motion system. If a draft comes in, they can delaminate or they can curl or separate from the bed. And that's not what you want. You want to keep the heat
Interesting.
around. And so those machines work well for that. And those are going to be over $1,000.
Okay, okay, interesting.
But still, these are machines that have a 10-inch by 10-inch build volume. That's 256 by 256 millimeters and print polycarbonate. These machines can print nylon. Like these are engineering materials and they can do it. They just don't do it easily, but they do it fast too. These machines print really fast. And so I think that to start out, you could spend a few $100s, get yourself one of their A1 machines, whether it's the A1 or the A1 Mini, depending on the size of the space you have for a 3D printer. Then you get a couple rolls of filament and you just have some fun printing.
That sounds awesome. What project do people, or do you recommend to start up? And with that, what are some fun projects that you've seen that were really inspiring to you?
I think to get started, I think what really helps is to look around your house or your apartment or your school or your workshop or whatever and look for something custom or think of something that you can make that might not exist otherwise, or something that you would have to go to the store to get, but you can make it at home. I remember I made a YouTube short about this. I needed a funnel. I was using a resin machine and I had to put the resin back into the container. And I had a strainer and a filter to pour the resin back in, but I needed a funnel to be able to do it. And it was like 11:30 at night. And I'm like, no store's open. And so what I was able to do is design and print a filter so that it only took a few hours. And then what I was able to do is take care of business with the resin. I used the filter, I used
The funnel.
I used the funnel, put the filter in the funnel, and then drained the resin back into the bottle. And that was a good first project to start. One of the things I utilized 3D printing for at the very beginning was what we call practical printing, right? Practical uses of it. And we had a refrigerator. It was a 2-door one. And these 2-door ones, the left door always has a flap that comes out so that this other door closes against it. And it rides this little track up above. As the flap goes, it rides a track to be able to flip out. And when the kids were young, they had slammed the door accidentally and broke off part of the track. And so what I was able to do is take that part out, put it down, and it was missing some parts, but I figured out how to draw it, how to sketch it out. And then I started taking measurements, and then I took that into CAD. I used Fusion 360, recreated the part from what I thought it was supposed to look like. Then I printed it out and I put it up there and I tested it out. And I was like, okay, took it down. And then I changed a little bit. I put it back up and the door, it worked. It absolutely worked. And so that I printed a final part in glass-filled nylon because that is never going to break. But that was one of the cool projects that I found a need within my space that could utilize 3D printing because I could now make a part doesn't exist anymore. The refrigerator's way out of warranty and they don't sell part for it. I
Yeah.
could make it myself. And so I made it. As far as initial projects to try out, a lot of times on these machines, they come with example models on their onboard memory or their USB stick or SD card or whatever they're using. And those are great projects to start out with because they're meant to showcase the features of the machine.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
then they can
mm-hmm.
give you ideas. So a lot of print in place mechanisms, right? Things that can be made via additive manufacturing that can't be made other ways. You can print things that interface with each other as the layers go up. And now there are print in place mechanisms that can move. And
Living
those are really
hinges
fun
and
projects to do. A lot of times on onboard memory, you'll have whistles that you can print in place. You just print a whistle, takes 30 minutes, and then you got a whistle. Sometimes what they do is they will have models on the memory for these consumer machines that you can print that are then tools to help you utilize the machine.
interesting. Okay.
It's kind of fun.
Okay. Yeah.
There are hundreds of thousands of free models out there on various model repositories that you can search. You can just go to, for example, Printables, Thingiverse, or Maker World, or Cults 3D. I mean, all of these places. And just, if you have an idea for something like, oh, I need a bracket in my closet for a broom. Oh, here's some things that people have designed already that might fit the bill. And then you can go through and find the one you want. Be like, oh, this could work. Then you print it out and you put it in your closet. You screw it in place. You put your broom. You're like, hey, look at that. You solved the problem.
Yeah. I love that. I love that approach. Why? Because it also translates so well to industrial 3D printing. Really, what you're talking about is you're talking about the supply chain of additive manufacturing. I don't have a
Yeah.
funnel. I can't get it. There's no supplier available. So I'm going to print it.
Yeah.
That's the whole supply chain idea of additive manufacturing. And that's why we're talking, or that's why the Navy is looking into additive manufacturing, because they don't need a funnel, but they need a casting application, and the supplier doesn't exist anymore. The casting house.
Well, I mean, everything is needed. They need funnels at sea.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then the other perspective is the performance improvement, where we talk about customization, applications and parts that would be very difficult to manufacture conventionally, either from a design perspective, like those living hinges you were talking about, or a custom low volume part that is better than the conventional application, but I couldn't justify making a tool just for a one-off application. So that translates really well into the industrial space as well.
Absolutely.
Joel, thank you for your wisdom today. I think it's very important that we bring this consumer discussion into the industrial space because of all of those reasons. Getting people into the industry, getting them to think additively, and also open up their eyes on the industrial, but also consumer implications that we're still starting to see in the industry of manufacturing. Yes, we have seen some great adoption in certain industries, but we're still at the very beginning in most of them. Is there any final advice you want to give to somebody out there who is now starting out in additive manufacturing?
Sure. This is great. If I could offer any advice, it would be to find others within the 3D printing space to meet up with them. On the industrial side, we have Rapid, we have TCT, we have Formnext, we have AMUG. We have these really great networking events so people can always come back, reminisce, and talk about the industry and see where it's going forward and compare notes and do all this stuff. On the consumer side, we have rep festivals. We have one on the East Coast. We have one in the Midwest. We have one in the UK. We have one in Denver coming up in April, actually. And it's the same thing, but for the consumer side, people who use consumer-based 3D printing to do all sorts of insane projects, lots of DIY stuff. And people visit because they're just excited for this industry and they want to learn more about it. So if there's any advice I could offer to anyone out there who's wanting to get started in additive manufacturing, find people who are also interested in it at these events, whether they're consumer or industrial, and go visit and have some wonderful conversations.
Couldn't agree more. I could talk about additive for hours, and especially at these conferences that you mentioned, we talk about it for hours and days.
Here's a challenge to you.
Yeah.
It's a challenge to you. So you being someone who we just talked about consumer-based 3D printing, how you don't have one at home, what should I get? What can I print with? What material? Find yourself one of these consumer festivals to go to. They're usually free to get in, or maybe $10, way less expensive than Formnext and PID. And then go look around and talk to people. What's great is when you go to these, people want to know your story. Hey, I work for EOS. We do these things. And oh, I never get to see this. Show me this. And then they'll tell you about their thing. And I bet additive as a whole would benefit if EOS and companies like EOS sent representatives to these consumer shows to people and to learn more. And I think if we had more of these consumer-based people able to go to the industrial shows to see how far additive has gone, I think that will foster all sorts of adoption.
Okay. Challenge accepted.
Yes.
I'll also definitely look into getting my own consumer printer. 6 years ago, you inspired somebody from GE. Now you inspired me.
I can't wait. You're going to have to keep posting on what you do.
We'll definitely do that. Let's also do a follow-up episode on whatever I produce or where I fail. And yeah, that also gives me the opportunity to then learn the intricacies of consumer printing when I go to these shows to talk to those guys. Yeah, this is awesome. We'll keep this collaboration afloat between the 3D printing nerd and Additive Snack. I think together we can hopefully do our part in growing the industry and educating people on technology.
I love everything about that.
Then, Joel, thanks again so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. Thank you so much. That was amazing. I had a really great time.
Same here. And for our listeners out there, make sure to also subscribe to Joel's YouTube channel, The 3D Printing Nerd. As I said,
go to youtube.com/3D Printing Nerd. Take you right there.
Perfect. As I said, more than 600,000 followers for a reason. He puts out really interesting content. Also, make sure to subscribe to this podcast where we feature these bright minds in the industry. And yeah, this has been Additive Snack. I'm Fabian Ahlefeld, and I see you guys next week.